All right, hello, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we try to hook you up with information that is off the beaten path, things that you wouldn't know anything about, but if you did, it might change your life. And we've been doing a lot of Bible decodes coming from the New Testament over the last few months. All as part of a unit called the Reciprocal Church, where we are really attempting to recognize that all 5 of the Western religions are about to crash and burn, and we're going to pick up the pieces with everybody having their own religion. And so we're trying to give you the toolbox, the tools that you need to really kind of go for an inside-out type of reverence for the divine. And that's kind of led us into some of these Bible decodes. A lot of them are using the Roman origins hypothesis, that the New Testament was not written by semi-literate apostles of Jesus, but by the very well-educated Greek-speaking and writing Romans, the Caesars of, in particular, the Flavian dynasty, and that includes emperors Vespasian and his 2 sons, Titus and Domitian, who were Caesars of Rome from 69 to 96 AD. And they wrote the New Testament, according to the theory, as a psychological operation against the Jews, who they were very tired of, having just gotten done fighting a 7-year war against them, in which both Titus and Vespasian were generals, and both were wounded in the war. And the Romans had been custodians of the Jews for over 100 years up before that, and they were a pain in the butt to govern, because the Jews were always revolting and insurrecting and rioting and uprising, because they had a monotheistic God who was jealous and zealous, and also obsessive compulsive, and had a pretty bad smoking addiction to animal fat, smoked animal fat, and he, as a result, had the Jews on, I believe the number that I saw was not 10 commandments, but 613 commandments. 613 different laws that they had to obey, many of them quirky and idiosyncratic, including a lot of kosher food laws, animal sacrifice laws, and other cleanliness laws, and strictures against graven images, and circumcision. So, and the Jews were ready to die when these rituals were threatened by the Romans. And so what better time for Titus and Vespasian to propose instead of the military Messiah that the Jews were waiting for. But instead, the Romans proposed a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace, and who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, turning the other cheek to oppression, walking an extra mile with the Roman soldier's pack, believing that the Roman slave owner had the greatest faith in all of Judea, and praying to his God that to forgive the Romans, for they know not what they do. And in addition, at the same time, Jesus is outside the Jewish temple, overturning the tables of the Jewish money changers, switching out taboo Roman money with graven images all over it to the Jewish money, which was kosher to bring inside the temple for the offering, and disrupting the vendors, the Jewish vendors, who were out there selling pigeons and doves for the animal sacrifice to take place inside the temple. So the Jesus of the Romans was incredibly deferential to the Romans, while at the same time being very much attacking the Jews and their rituals, just as Jesus would be if he were actually written by the Romans. So that's kind of your first red flag, but it goes much further. What the Romans did is they backdated the story of Jesus by 40 years or 40 plus years, placing it in the early 30s AD. 30 to 33 AD was Jesus' 3-year ministry. And at the same time, they wrote up a history of this war that they just got done fighting against the Jews. And this history is in 7 volumes, and it came out under the name of Josephus, who was a member of the Flavian dynasty of some form or another, and a resident at Caesar's palace, and one of the court historians of the Caesars. And this is called War of the Jews. And that sets out, among other things, the 3-year military campaign of Titus from 70 to 73 AD. Every place that Titus goes in his military campaign, one place to the next, having fighting in one battle here and having another event over here, and then having an adventure there. Every place that Titus goes, Jesus also goes, in the same order. And every event that happens to Titus also happens to Jesus in an analogous form, or a conceptually parallel form, the same type of event. And the events are spaced out by 40 years. The events of Titus occur exactly 40 years, sometimes to the hour of the time that the events occur in Jesus' 3-year ministry. Some people have managed to note these parallels, and others have managed to note that many of the prophecies that Jesus makes in the New Testament are literally fulfilled in the pages of War of the Jews, many of them by Titus. So those are kind of 2 different sets of parallels between those 2 books. The upshot is that, and they parallel each other. Sometimes Jesus is paralleling Josephus. Sometimes Josephus is paralleling the Gospels. It's mutual, meaning that they were written by the same authors at the same time for the same reason. And again, that reason is a psychological operation to domesticate, tame, prune, or just mellow out the Jews. Get them to be good citizens, as opposed to these, revolutionaries that they were, or many of them were anyway. The Gospels were really targeted toward the zealots, whereas the Romans, showing their MO, their method of operation, they actually created another religion that they targeted toward the Pharisaic Jews, which is called Rabbinical Judaism. And the story between Johanan ben Zakkai, the founder of the Rabbinical school, and the story of Josephus are parallels. They both gave Vespasian, they both surrendered to Vespasian and defected and gave Vespasian the star prophecy to say that one day, Vespasian, you will become the new Caesar. And when Vespasian did become the new Caesar, he hooked them up. In Josephus's case, he pardoned Josephus, brought him to Rome, made him the court historian, gave him a townhouse at Caesar's palace, and adopted him as a member of his family. With Ben Zakkai, it was that he gave him a campus and a land grant so that he could establish a school for the study of the Torah. And that turned into this Rabbinical Judaism school. So the Romans were well known to create religions for psychological operations. The Romans also, again, spoke in Greek and wrote in Greek, the language of the New Testament, whereas in Judea, Greek was rare and confined to the elites. The Romans also had the only postal service in the Roman Empire. They had a monopoly on censorship, and they had a monopoly on publishing. They had thousands of slaves who sat there all day copying texts over and over again. That's how they were able to get out thousands of copies of these Gospels. And it's important to note that the Gospels in general were meant as plays to be performed in front of people, because very few people knew how to read in the first place. So this would be a story, a play. Each Gospel would be performed. And so now we're looking at the book of Michael Menescot's here. It's called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. And what he does is he looks into, in particular, the book of Luke and Jewish War by Josephus and finds parallels. He found over 250 parallels just in the book of Luke. It's over 10 per chapter, and meaning that the parallels are literally like saturating the text, because some of the parallels require several verses. There are only 1,151 parallels, only 1,151 verses in Luke, and there's over 250 parallels. That's one every 4.6 verses. And some of the parallels take up multiple verses. So it's literally like one parallel after another, after another, after another. We'll get into that when we look at the book of Luke in focus. But not only that, not only all of those different parallels, some strong, some weak, some well hidden, some incredibly well thought out, some apparently just slapped together. But he grafted them out on a chart with the book of Luke on the vertical axis, War of the Jews on the horizontal axis. He plotted all 250 plus points of their correspondence at the proper location on the chart, and found that he had formed 5 near perfect letters in Latin, the language of the Roman elite. APTVS. I think it's obvious that the TVS stands for Titus Vespasianus, that they used on coins, as a matter of fact, that were imprinted in this time period. So the AP is up for some debate. But anyway, Menescot's, basically what this means is that not only did the Romans write the book of Luke, but they signed their name to it. And so this is, I think, certainly enough to provide a prima facie case for you to do further research and look into this, even if it feels like it's against your better interest. Because the Romans put this together in a mean-spirited manner. They're mocking you, they're ridiculing you, and they're getting you to do and believe in some stuff that you are very, very opposed to if you're a Christian. And I think this first example, because we're going to be going through some of these parallels, these are some of the weaker parallels in the A and the P. Menescot suggests that the A and the P was kind of slapped together at a later period, and it makes sense because the A and the P is not as well developed, the parallels are not as strong, and the beginning of Josephus is really just introductory. You don't actually get up to 66 AD where the war actually starts, which is the topic of the book. You don't really get to that till you get to the T and the V and the S. So, it could have easily been added later. But this particular parallel is particularly disturbing. We started it the other day, yesterday, but did not finish it. So we're going to start it again today. Jewish War 166, Book 1, Chapter 27, Chapter 24, Paragraph 7. There were 3 eunuchs. This is from Josephus. There were 3 eunuchs, one appointed as the king's butler. Another of them got his supper ready for him, got the king's supper ready for him. So the king, in this case, we're talking about Herod. So the king of the Jews. Herod was the Roman puppet. Herod was a whole dynasty of puppet rulers of Judea under the Romans. So he could be called the king of the Jews. Another of them got his supper ready for him, and the third put him to bed and lay down by him to be used obscenely. And they confessed to the intercourse. They were rebuked for touching of a sexual nature. But Alexander said not to fix their hopes upon Herod, an old man, and one so shameless as to color his hair. Okay, and that is matched up with Luke 7:37 and Luke 18:15. Luke 7:37, Jesus sat down to have meat. Again, the king of the Jews eating. Jesus sat down to have meat, and a woman in the city who was a sinner brought an alabaster box of ointment, and she wiped his feet with the hairs of her head and anointed them with the ointment. And the Pharisee said, "What manner of woman is this that touches him, for she is a sinner?" He implies, Menescot's the author here, implies a few things that I don't think are necessarily in the text, but he says when the Pharisee says, "What manner of a woman is this?" He is saying that this is potentially a crude metaphor for a eunuch. What manner of woman is this that touches him? For she is a sinner. Okay, then to Luke 18:15. They brought him infants that he would touch them, but his disciples rebuked them. And Matthew 19:13 adds more detail to this, saying that, "For there are some eunuchs born that way, others were made eunuchs of men, and some made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake." So he's also talking about three types of eunuchs, and one is associated with a king, and he says a kingdom. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. It's a lot easier to kind of dismiss that as coincidental until that last sentence. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. Okay, his commentary. Again, here we see the author quite content, and he's saying author in the singular because whoever wrote the first set also wrote the second. Again, here we see the author quite content to reference sexual topics, knowing that they would be revealed only to a specific audience, presumably to help force that audience to accept that Jesus' story was all a big fiction. That's what he's talking about when he's talking about a Flavian secrecy cult. There's 4 different layers to it. First, you accept Jesus as the hero, then Jesus as a savior, and then Titus as the second coming of Jesus. And then you see that Jesus' story is fiction, and that allows you to accept Titus as pure emperor worship. So his further analysis: Christians are well aware of the passage in Matthew and Luke talking of Jesus being reprimanded for his touching of children, and of men becoming eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of God, and how this is followed by the phrase, "He who can receive it, let him receive it." Christians do not see it as a euphemism for gay sex, let alone promoting it, of course. However, when you see this parallel in Jewish war by the king having his eunuch lie down in bed to be used in a sexual manner, the meaning in Luke becomes obvious. And noting that one of the Flavian emperors, Domitian, is recorded as having at least one eunuch servant, we can now guess at how they were used, and therefore why Luke would suggest such a thing should be socially acceptable for emperors. Now his footnote talks about the most famous translation of Josephus by William Whiston, and it says, "This is the famous translation by William Whiston dating from the 1600s. The word obscenely that he puts into it is probably his take on the passage, reflecting his 16th century views." Well, it's really 17th century, I believe. Thackeray's translation, by contrast, skims over the issue lightly, saying he slept in his chamber. A look at the original Greek reveals the eunuchs confessed to a word called uvuluvia, uvulov, meaning coitus. So there is no doubt that this is talking about a king having sex with his castrated male servant. But it does not seem that Jewish war is seeking to denigrate this act as obscene. Instead, to have it be seen as socially acceptable. Okay, we're going to flip the page. I would say that that parallel is utterly devastating, um, because when you see the parallel, then you can figure out what Luke is intending to mean by it. Okay, the suggestion that it is acceptable for Jesus, and by implication Titus, to be brought children for him to touch in a manner that others considered inappropriate tells us more about what kinds of abuse might have been normalized. Perhaps given that 10% of the population were slaves, horrific abuse was essentially the norm. Okay, next parallel, Jewish War 280, Book 2, Chapter 11, Paragraph 6, is expanded on by the parallel story in Antiquities of the Jews, which is a 20-volume work that Josephus did later in his life. It is in this section that it describes the location of Noah's Ark, and that is matched up with Luke 17:27, the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came. This is a particularly easy parallel to find if you have a computer, since ark occurs once in each document. However, the detail was hidden in Antiquities of the Jews, which is the far more detailed version of the first half of Jewish War. Without the assistance of Antiquities of the Jews, the A and the P in the APTVS pattern seem slightly patchy, which either means they were created in a rush or that the author erred in making many of the parallels unduly subtle. Yeah, some of the parallels are so subtle that you can just read right over them and not notice them until they're pointed out to you. I believe the Romans were really big on this. They liked to play word games and riddles and enigmas and puzzles and puns, name switching techniques. And so this was kind of a sport to them, to find parallels and to laugh about them and to denigrate their Jews or whoever is actually believing in this text. So that's what I'm saying. I would suggest that you do your due diligence and get yourself a copy of Josephus and find out for yourself if this is leaving you with a question. You can find out for yourself whether you are being mocked by this text that's 2,000 years old, almost. Okay, this is Jewish War 222, Book 1, Chapter 33, Paragraph 9. Herod's body was followed by a multitude, including 500 servants and freedmen. Herod was buried at Herodium, under the hill, which famously is a hill the shape of a woman's breast, point, which is confirmed in Jewish War 146. Those 500 people had sweet spices in their hands. And the next paragraph continues saying, with Archelaus, another one of the Herods, coming from Rome, and at the Feast of Unleavened Bread setting up a trial where Jews clamored for him to release those that were in prison, and he offered sacrifices, and they lamented those put to death by Herod. Okay, he says a handful of spices would equate to probably a little under 1 modern ounce, and 500 people with 1 Roman ounce in each hand. That is 1 Roman pound weight of spices. Okay. And this is matched up with Luke 23, several verses within Luke 23. There followed him a great company of people with women who bewailed and lamented him. For the days are coming in the which they shall say, blessed are the barren, and the breasts which never give suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. At Jesus' death, they came with spices, about 100 Roman pound weight carried for Jesus' funeral. And at least at a feast of unleavened bread, they cried out, Pilate, that Barabbas would be released from prison, after which Jesus was put to death in a manner resembling a Passover sacrifice, and partly as a result of the actions of a Herod. Okay, so there are a number of different parallels in these two sets of texts. A great company of people, a certain amount of weight of spices, the hills, and the shape of a breast, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Roman installed head of the tribunal, releasing from prison, and being put to death. Partly because of the actions of Herod. Many scholars have noted how Jesus' death evokes that of a king, or in view of his purple robe, an emperor. One example of this is the implausible 100 Roman pound weight of spices being carried. However, all one needs to appreciate is that a handful of spices is about 1 Roman ounce, and then you can see that Jewish war offers the same numerical value as Luke for the amount of funeral spices. Okay, see if we can get through one more here real fast. Jewish War 233. When that feast called Pentecost was at hand, its name being taken from the number of the days after the Passover, they came and laid their forces around Jerusalem in 3 parts, to the north, south, and west of Jerusalem, thus on all sides to besiege the Romans who were in Jerusalem. And Antiquities expands on this, saying they encamped, and the first part extended from the northern extent to the southern extent of the temple on the east quarter. Luke 13:24 and 29. Strive to enter in at the strait gate, for many, I say to you, will seek to enter in and shall not be able. When once the master of the house is risen up and has shut to the door, and ye begin to stand without and to knock at the door, and they shall come from the east and from the west and from the north and from the south, and shall sit down in the kingdom of God. Okay, quite a few parallels there, north, south, east, and west, and knocking at the door, standing and entering. I don't think there's any about the Passover, but anyway.